bring Coach Wannstedt on. Let me say this to you. When Coach Wannstedt was a very aggressive coordinator. But you know where he was aggressive with? His front four. Because most of the time, when Dave was the DC in Dallas and in college and almost all of his other places, and the places that he didn't have pressure on the front four, those are the places that traditionally struggled. Because he believed in this, get home. Then you got really great corners and safeties back there. Do you know when the Cowboys won all them Super Bowls, they were the youngest team in the league. They went out and they found guys in latter rounds. But the key to the whole thing was playing the 43. An aggressive 43. Now, one last thing before I bring Coach on. Coach Wannstedt is the guy who recruited Aaron Donald, coached Jerome Brown, coached guys like Jalen Carter. I've said this to you guys, and I rarely say this. Jerome was a loose cannon, as I was, as Jimmy said it too. We all were. But they controlled us. And I'll say this to you. When you have character issues, Dave Wannstedt, Butch Davis, Jimmy Johnson were the greatest evaluators of the interview. Let's bring in Coach Wannstedt. Coach,
what's up, Danny?
How you doing, Coach? I want to start right out of the gate here with you. There's a lot of negativity being thrown around right now on Jalen Carter. It looks like he potentially could fall, maybe even to the Bears where you do some work with those guys. Coach, when you see a player like that, and I'm going to use Philadelphia at 10, if Howie Roseman has the ability to draft him at 10, and you're in that chair, you're the DC, would you draft him at 10?
Well, I think now we don't know the history. We know that all his legal issues, accusations, whatever at Georgia, some of them, obviously, he was cleared of all the major ones. What something like that does, though, Dan, it would cause us to now dig a little deeper and look a little further into the history of any player and say, now, was this a one-time incident or is there a history of this? So let's assume that everything is good. Okay, that's all good. Now, as a player, I haven't evaluated all the tape, and I know that a lot of people had him as the best player in the draft.
Coach, he looks like Jerome.
He did. Watching that championship game, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't like to see defensive linemen put their hands up and say, "Give me a rest," right?
Yep.
And I'm watching this guy, and I'm waiting to see a Jerome Brown or a Cortez Kennedy or a Russell Maryland, okay, or a Dan Sileo. I'm waiting to see these impact plays in the biggest game of the year, and I didn't see it. Now, I would go back and I would be real clear. I would make the decision if I was Howie in Philadelphia, is he the type of player? Let's assume everything's good. Is he the type of player that we can count on to go out there and play every game of the season and play through some when he's banged up a little bit and be on time and do all those things that you need to do to be a real pro? That's the only question. I can't answer that from an ability standpoint. Sure, if I was the Bears, I would take him. And the other thing that you got to look at, there's a half a dozen. They call them edge rushers now. I call them defensive end, pass rushers. There's probably 2 times, maybe 3 times as many pass rushers in this year's draft as they are inside tackles. And he's a guy that could play the 4-3, as you mentioned, at Philadelphia. The Bears with Matt Eberflus, the head coach, they run a 4-3. And it's a combination of what we did at Dallas and what Tony Dungy did at Tampa, kind of a combination of both. He can play a tackle in a 4-3. He can play a nose guard, in the 3-4.
So you could put him in a 1, a
Yep.
slant, a 2, and a 3, and kind of move him up and down the line and go to bare front, 50 front, 34, 43. You're looking at the versatility.
Yeah, he's a Jerome Brown type that Jerome could play the nose, and so he's that, Cortez Kennedy, that type of player, as compared to the guy, and I love him, the Cansey kid at Pitt, the defensive tackle, shorter, not as big, but he is a typical 3 technique. He's not big and physical enough, in my opinion, to play the nose. But you put him on the edge of a guard, and he's going to make as he did in college. He led the country in tackles for loss. He's going to make a lot of plays.
So you think he's a 3 technique?
I think Cansey's a definite 3 technique, but I think Jalen Carter gives you a lot more flexibility.
Coach, when you were recruiting Aaron Donald, what was the thing you did? Because, Coach, you've recruited so many great players, man. I mean, the list is endless. I mean, of some of the guys, I could go forever. Darrell Revis and all these other guys, man. I mean, there's just a boatload of them. And he's 6 feet, 275. What did you see in him that made you go, let's go. He's a guy for Pitt.
Well, he was a state champion wrestler, so the guy showed a lot of leverage. And he could bend, and as he does now, and turn his body and do things.
Great hands.
Athletically. He had quick hands, and he had heavy hands. I mean, if Aaron gets a hold of you, you weren't getting away. You saw those things. And again, I'm going to come back to, Dan, because of the scheme we were playing. We were playing that 4-3 defense, and I said, you know what? We can play with that undersized tackle that's got the quickness and –
we had that at Miami, Coach. We were all undersized tackles.
Absolutely. No question about it. And that's, then at Dallas, I mean, Tony Casillas, was only 6'1". He would be classified an undersized tackle. So, that's what Aaron Donald brought to the table. And then you put in his work ethic, and that's something that I knew about, and some scouts did, some scouts don't. I don't know enough about Jalen Carter with those intangibles. What am I getting in the weight room? I don't know, but that's important. You take a guy in the first round, a team like the Bears is different than the Eagles. If the Eagles take him, he's going to be line. Fletcher Cox is going to keep him in line, right?
Yeah.
All pro tackle. At the Bears, they don't have anybody like that. I mean, the Bears do not have a veteran defensive player really that has played, at that Pro Bowl level. They don't have one. So, I mean, he's going to come into the Bears, and it's going to be a different environment than what it is at Philadelphia. I'm not so sure Philadelphia might not be a better fit for the kid.
Coach, do you think in today's NFL, I mean, I said before I brought you on, I mean, man, Jim Johnson, Bud Carson, Buddy Ryan, all these aggressive D coordinators now in the NFL targeting defenseless wideouts. You can't hit quarterbacks. I watched Jonathan Gannon have the second-ranked defense in the NFL, and it was absolutely one of the most lamest defenses I've ever seen because it was just this, Coach. Don't get beat on plus 25 plays. Keep everything in front of me. Wait for the quarterback or someone to make a mistake, a turnover, and let's play ball from 20 to 20. We'll worry about the red zone. Do you think it's tougher today to be a coordinator in today's NFL, and that's what it's trending to, is keep everything underneath?
Yeah, I'll tell you where I learned a lot, philosophy-wise. When you guys were going to be seniors, I don't know if you remember or not, Buddy Ryan, who went to Oklahoma.
I got a picture of it.
Yeah, he went to Oklahoma State. So Jimmy had to report him because of coaching there. And Buddy called up, and I was the pro in between. When the pros would come in, I would get all the film for them and talk to them and about the players and all that stuff for us. And Buddy called up and wanted to come in, and Jimmy said, yeah, sure, blah, blah, blah. They were talking. He obviously agreed. And I said, hey, Jimmy, tell Buddy that he comes in. We'll give him anything he wants on all of our guys. He was mainly looking at Jerome with that first pick, which they took him. I said, but ask him if he will spend a few hours and talk about the 46 defense.
Coach, he did. Coach, I got a picture of that I've posted.
Yep.
Of Buddy coming down, and he had Stubbs, myself, Jerome, I believe you, and I think Butch. We're all watching, and he's explaining on the chalkboard the 46 to us and about leverage and about angles and about this and that. And we're sitting there looking at one another going like, wow, man, I remember that day when he came down.
Well, what's interesting is the thing, and going back to your point about being aggressive, the first thing he said was, he says, let me tell you something. He says, every game that you coach, if the quarterback, every time he drops back, is not fearful of getting hit in the mouth, you got a good chance to get beat defensively. So the mentality that your defense has to have is every time he drops back, he's going to get hit. And that was the aggressiveness that Buddy coached everywhere with, Chicago, Philadelphia. And we talked about that. And I would say,
Coach.
I'd say, hey, he's going to drop back. We're going to hit him in the mouth. We're going to hit him in the mouth, and we're going to hurry his throws, and we're going to make him nervous and throw off balance and not set his feet. And that was kind of a philosophy. Nowadays, obviously, the rule changes, Dan. I don't know if any coaches on defense are saying that anymore. I really don't.
Coach, I know this. That 86 team that I played on, we had 56 sacks in 12 games. I mean, that's when you always said, why am I blitzing? I'm not blitzing. My guys are getting home. I mean, you mean Stubbs had 18 sacks that one year.
It's kind of funny because we all know you blitz your single coverage. You got a chance to give up a big one. And, God, we'd be beating somebody. And I'd say, I'd call a blitz. And Jimmy would flip the headset over and he'd say, hey, Dave, don't get bored. Do not get bored. Don't get bored with those four guys up front now. We don't need Coach, 7. We don't need 7 coming.
Coach, when you got to Dallas, and you guys, and I tell people this, Dave and Butch and Jimmy, you guys never gave a shit about the name on the back of the jersey. You looked for a style of player, and you looked for a profile type of player, and then you figured out who he was. When you guys were in Dallas and the intangibles of drafting, you guys built that dynasty, 3 titles. Everyone knows the story. What kind of players were you looking for when you were putting your draft board together?
The first thing, and I won't use her name here, there was a player that came out in the draft, and he ended up being drafted by someone in the first round. And, God, he was a great-looking player, a defensive lineman. And we were talking about him, and the thing that Jimmy always used, and this is going back to Miami, we always talk production. Production. That was the first thing. And I remember sitting in that draft room, the two of us, and I said, let me throw up this guy's production. And Jimmy made the comment, Dave, we had guys get this many sacks in one game. This is all this guy had in 3 or 4 years. So we didn't even bring him in for a visit. On the other hand, Maurice Crum, who you knew, Maurice Crum, I was recruiting him out of Tampa. He was undersized. He was a linebacker for our viewers here. And Florida State didn't offer him. Miami didn't offer him. And I said to Jimmy, look at this guy. He's 100 tackles. I never seen him hit the ground. He makes plays after plays. We brought him in. He was a 4-year starter. I think it took Ray Lewis to break his record with tackles at Miami, and won 2 or 3 national championships, maybe, whatever. But the point is production, Dan. If you weren't, and that's what Aaron Donald was. As a defensive tackle, he was a playmaker at the defensive tackle. Jimmy used to use the word playmaker. Well, that's production.
Was it Mike Mamala, was it?
Andre
Bruce? That guy was a stiff.
I I can't remember.
Yeah. Coach, then that leads me to this about last year's 13th pick. So I said this about Jordan Davis. I watched him run that tremendous 4.78 at 300 and whatever pounds, 348, 338, whatever it was. And I said this to someone. So he had 9 sacks in 4 years at Georgia. I had that in 1 year. I mean, I had 100 tackles. I'm like, that just doesn't seem to me where that's a lot of production. And I watched him this year, Coach. I mean, in 5 years, he's got 9 sacks, 4 years in college, 1 year in the NFL. He was the 13th pick. I mean, can guys ever grow into it? Or is that kind of part of your DNA that either you're around the ball or you're not around the ball? Because sometimes when I watch him, hopefully we can get Coach back here in a second here, because I want to finish up here with with Jordan Davis here. Hopefully we're able to catch him back here. Because, again, guys, it's not a rip that I'm talking about here with Jordan Davis. It's like, I'm going to ask Dave, can a guy like that grow in to being productive? Because he's never been a production guy. Like I heard Barrett Brooks say, hey, man, here's a guy that probably is going to be more of an assist guy. And what that means is going to be more of an assist guy because he's going to help more on the run. Well, guys, know this. That's not the 13th pick. And so sometimes you fall in love with what you see at the combines. And when you hear people saying, I think he's going to have a monster year, Jordan Davis has never had a monster year. He's never had one. Like, he's never had a massive production year. So, again, it's just to sit here and go, okay, well, he's going to develop into this. I think that's part of your DNA. Either you're a guy who is always productive and you're producing. I think that's kind of who you are. Jacob says is that Georgia blew out opponents. 2003 is Jordan Davis's year. Book it. Arthur, Jordan Davis has never been productive. He's never had the production that we're talking about here. They would never take Jordan Davis in the 13th pick. That's not true. They wouldn't take a guy that's not productive. I know those men for 35, 40 years. They're not taking a guy like Jordan Davis. They would never draft him. That Cowboy team would never have drafted him. Ever. Never drafted him. Not at 13. Okay, not at 13. Jason goes, Dan, isn't he a lot like Wolford? Let's see if we're able to. Coach Wannstedt says experienced connection issues due to thunderstorm in the area, working to get him back. Okay, fantastic. We're good. Okay, let's do this then. That's a great take, Jason. That's a great take. Coach must be in Florida. What pick was Vince Wilfork drafted in? Vince was the 21st player taken. That sounds right. I had Jordan Davis at 22. That sounds about right. See, when I saw Jordan Davis at Georgia, I saw Vince Wilfork. And by the way, I don't think Vince is – that's why I said this to you, and I say this to you guys. Hey, man, Jordan's not a bust. He's Vince Wilfork. He's not Fletcher Cox. But when you take a guy at 13, this was my place on how I told you that he's overdrafted. That's overdrafting. That's a prime example. Jordan Davis is never going to put up big numbers. He's never going to be a 10-sack guy in his entire career. That's not going to happen. And for the 13th pick, you need to have more production. That's always been my take with him. Hey, Jason, absolutely. And to be fair to Jordan, he'll probably play 10 years in Philly. But he'll be a Vince Wilfork type. He'll never be a Fletcher Cox type. And just because he's taken 13th doesn't mean he's living up to it. He never was that player at Georgia. He's never been a productive player. Wilfork ran a 4.08. So, excuse me, Jordan Davis has a long way to go before, excuse me, Arthur, before you have Super Bowl titles and before you're Vince Wilfork. He's nowhere near that guy. That guy was destroyed in the Super Bowl, and he played 12 plays in the Super Bowl, and you had to get two guys from the ice cream stand to help with the defensive run. So don't start talking to me about that. Are you trying to suggest to me that you think Jordan Davis is a better football player than Vince Wilfork? You're on drugs. You're on drugs. Okay? Let's see if the kid could be a productive starter first before you start talking about a guy who is a perennial Pro Bowler and won Super Bowls and played for Belichick. Let's see if he could be a starter first before you start dogging Vince Wilfork out. Yeah, we'll see. Dude, I don't believe it. But as I said the other day when we were looking at the defense, I said that, hey, he's a starter now. More's going to be asked of him. It was in a backup role. He got hurt a little bit. He was out of shape. Isn't it funny? Georgia has a trend now. So their two defensive tackles have conditioning questions. Boy, I would look at Kirby Smart and go, what are you doing down there? So am I right when I say this? So Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter have conditioning issues and preparation issues. Is that because you have so many great players down there? That could be, but man, the worst thing you can ever hear a guy say is, well, he's never in shape. And so two dudes that were at Georgia have conditioning problems. I don't know. Okay? I don't know, right? I mean, so now Carter's is not a guy who keeps himself in shape? Right. I mean, look, right? Am I right when I say this? Well, I mean, so last year, Jordan Davis was out of shape. Now this year, Jalen Carter couldn't get through the combines. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully we can reconnect with Dave here because I'd like to get that question to him about Jordan Davis. JM goes, how we can't draft D linemen or wide receivers, corners too. But hey, it's for another day. They won a national title. They surely did. I think it's because they have so many great players. The kid Walker and Wyatt are fabulous players. Dean was great down there. Dude, when you watch Nakobe Dean play, Nakobe Dean was a playmaking linebacker for them. Great secondary guys. Their corner. I mean, they've done a nice job of recruiting. Davis looked really good before that ankle. Tony, still though, not a lot of pressure on the quarterback. I mean, it's just not who he is. I think his size is an issue for healing that type of injury during the season. No, not his size. His conditioning is the problem. Dude, biggest guys, I mean, Fletcher Cox doesn't have issues like that. Fletcher's always in shape. Fletcher's just getting older. Okay? Fletcher's just getting older. I mean, once again, Arthur, you're missing the point. 13th pick, you need more out of it. The 13th pick in the draft for the Eagles last year gave you nothing. Gave you nothing. Okay? Nothing. He was a non-factor. I mean, Super Bowl, he was killed. Bleed green. Nakobe Dean won the strongest pound-for-pound player on the 2021 Georgia team. Bleed, but the problem again is his size. 6 feet, 215, 217, and you want him to play Mike linebacker? I don't know. Okay? I mean, I don't know if you can play 17 ball games like that. Tony says, you're right, Dan. I'm hoping he absorbs and matures into a solid starter. We're now hoping he's a little better than Vince. Okay? At least be close to the 13th pick. Right now, he's still playing like he's in. Tone says this. I asked B. Brooks straight up, was Jordan Davis overdrafted? And he said, if all he's going to be is a run stuffer, then yes, he was. You need more from the 13th pick. Yeah, Barrett knows that too. Right now, it's wishful thinking because they lost Hargrave. And like I said, if Jordan Davis, the new kid from the Saints, and Milton Williams can all together collectively get 11 to 15 sacks, then you've covered for it with less dough. You've covered for it with less money. And that's a win. That's a win for the Eagles because of the amount of money that they got to pay the quarterback and other positions. That's a win. Jordan Davis is never going to be a 10-sack guy. He's never been. You don't grow into that. You are that or you're not, I think. Now, could he affect the run game? He will. Like Vince. Vince helped the pass rushers. How? Stopping the run. Dude, why do you think a guy like Hassan Reddick became so productive towards the end of the year? Because Linville Joseph and Ndamukong Suh had done an adequate enough job to stop the run. You guys at the beginning of the year were down in the 20s. But when those guys showed up, it started getting to like 15 or 16th in the middle of the pack. Once that Eagle team got to the middle of the pack and stopping the run, this is going to be your biggest problem this year, stopping the run. I think the Eagles are going to get gashed this year like they were 2 years ago. That's my biggest concern is up the middle, is stopping the run. Because if you can't stop the run and teams run 200 yards on you, it'll be the offense will never get on the field. Hey, Dan, with the NFC not being as strong as the AFC, mostly quarterback-wise, you're saying, I'm assuming, will the NFC East all make the playoffs and Kyle Shannon Choker going to get to Super Bowl? I believe no. I believe Kyle Shanahan is a good coach. But I don't believe Kyle Shanahan protects his quarterbacks. Every quarterback he's coached has been killed. Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy, RG3 when he was a coordinator in Washington. He just doesn't protect quarterbacks. There's a trend there. Don't you see it? I mean, dude, for a guy who comes up with so many great schemes, this guy gets his quarterback killed. Gets his quarterback banged up. Hey, Tone, I'm going to take an early time. Wait a minute. Yeah, no, I hope that answers it, 34. I'm going to take an early timeout. Hopefully get Coach Wack for just a couple more minutes. We'll reset at the top of the hour here, so I'm going to take a brief timeout. If Coach comes back on, great. If not, hour number 3, keep it here on the National Football Show.